What happens when the most feared women on the open sea, rebels who commanded ships, defied kings, and struck terror into empires, are finally captured? You might think execution was their end, but history tells a far darker story. For these women, death was often a mercy they were denied. Behind the gallows and the headlines, they faced a punishment the world chose to forget, a life of humiliation, torture, and silence. Today, we're unearthing what truly happened to the women pirates the world once feared, and how the empires that hunted them made sure their screams never reached the shore. The image of a pirate has always been one of reckless adventure, a roaring sea, a black flag, and men with swords and rum-stained laughter. But history has a way of choosing who gets to be remembered as legend and who gets buried as scandal. For women, piracy was not adventure, it was rebellion. To the world's empires, a woman at the helm of a ship was not a hero or a criminal. She was an abomination, a violation of nature itself. And for that, her punishment was never meant to end with the gallows. It was meant to erase her completely. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the oceans were both a highway of wealth and a graveyard of ambition. Gold, sugar, slaves, and silk flowed endlessly between the colonies and Europe. The sea became the empire's bloodstream, and pirates were the disease it could not cure. Among those who prowled the waves were women whose courage and ruthlessness shocked even hardened sailors. They were names that men whispered in ports from Nassau to Port Royal, and Bonnie, Mary Red, Grace O'Malley, Jean de Belleville. These women did not merely follow men. They commanded crews, captured ships, and built reputations that made governors lose sleep. They lived outside law, religion, and gender itself. But their freedom came at a cost, a debt the empire was determined to collect with cruelty. When these women were finally captured, their trials began long before they reached any courtroom. The journey from ship to shore was the empire's theater of humiliation. Shackled in irons, barefoot and beaten, they were paraded through the docks as trophies. The sight of a woman pirate in chains was meant to disgust the crowd and restore order in men's minds. A performance reminding all who watched that rebellion, especially in a woman, would end in disgrace. The trial itself was just formality. The verdict had already been written. In colonial cities like Kingston, Port Royal, and London, these trials were turned into spectacles of control. Pamphlets were printed, artists were hired, and newspapers described every detail of their appearance. Their hair, their clothing, their posture. The goal was not justice, but degradation. To the empire, a woman who fought like a man was a threat that had to be publicly undone. They called them witches, whores, and devils. And yet, even while standing before men who had already condemned them, some refused to surrender their pride. And Bonnie's words still echo across time. When her lover, Calico Jack Rackham, was sentenced to hang, she stood before him and said coldly, "If you had fought like a man, you would not hang like a dog." It was the final blow, not with a sword, but with truth. The empire could take her life, but could not make her ashamed of her defiance. For other women, though, the empire's cruelty reached beyond the rope. Death was too clean for what they had dared to do. Many captured women pirates were not executed immediately. Instead, they were used. To the British, Spanish, and Portuguese empires, a living rebel was a useful tool, an example to display, a story to control. Some were forced into marriages with naval officers to restore their virtue. Others were sold into slavery in the colonies, their identities erased, their names replaced by numbers. In the Caribbean, women pirates captured near Jamaica or Cuba were branded with hot irons marked with the letter P for pirate or W for whore. They were paraded through markets and auctioned like cattle. Their captors called it justice. The world called it redemption. But the most horrific fate awaited those who survived imprisonment. The prisons of Port Royal, Havana, and London were chambers of slow death. The air was thick with rot, the floors alive with rats. Chains dug into their flesh as weeks turned into months, and their trials dragged on. Each day filled with mockery and violation. Some were kept in isolation, others forced to work as servants for the very men who had condemned them. Priests visited to save them, demanding confessions that blamed their defiance on the devil. The empire wanted repentance, not truth. It needed these women broken in body and spirit before the executioner's noose ever touched their necks. When Mary Read, Anne, and Bonnie were captured in 1720 after a brutal sea battle, their fate seemed sealed. They were charged with piracy, treason, and the crime of acting beyond the limits of womanhood. Both were sentenced to hang, but when the time came, they revealed they were pregnant. English law forbade the execution of expectant mothers. For a time, the empire was forced to wait. Mary gave birth in her cell, but disease claimed her soon after, and vanished from the record entirely. No grave, no document, no body. Some say her wealthy father bribed the officials and took her away in secret. Others believe she escaped and lived quietly under another name. But perhaps the truth is simpler. The empire erased her from its books to avoid turning her into a legend. Not all women pirates were famous. Many were ordinary sailors, slaves who mutinied, or widows who took to the sea to survive. Their stories rarely made it into archives, or frightened captains who encountered them. One such record describes a woman named Eliza de la Cruz, captured off the coast of Cuba in 1715. She was described as a devil in female form, a woman who commanded 40 men and burned a Spanish galleon. Her punishment was a spectacle. She was whipped 40 times before being chained in the hold of a prison ship for 6 months. When finally brought to trial, she refused to speak. The silence unnerved her judges so much that they ordered her execution without confession. Her body was burned at dawn to prevent inspiration among the lower orders. That was the point of it all, control through fear. The empire wanted the people to believe that rebellion was futile, that the ocean itself rejected women who dared to rule it. Executions became rituals of dominance. The condemned were forced to wear plain white gowns, stripped of any symbol of individuality, and marched through the streets under heavy guard. They were made to stand for hours before the noose while preachers screamed repentance sermons, reducing them from captains to sinners. When the trapdoor finally opened, the crowd did not see a person die. They saw order restored. And when the empire was done with their bodies, it took their names too. Some were left hanging for days, a warning to all who passed. Others were buried beneath the gallows, or dissected by doctors who claimed to study the female mind corrupted by freedom. But not every woman bent beneath that cruelty. Even in the darkest prisons, there were whispers of defiance. Smuggled notes written on scraps of cloth. Secret songs passed between cells. Hidden prayers that no god ever heard. In a prison off the coast of Tortuga, one unnamed woman carved her final words into the wall of her cell. "I was born twice, once by blood and once by the sea." Those words, found centuries later, survive as the last echo of a spirit the empire could not extinguish. Over time, as the age of piracy ended and the great navies claimed the seas, history began its quiet erasure. Textbooks named Blackbeard, Calico Jack, and Henry Morgan, but left out in Bonnie, Mary Read, and the countless women who fought beside them. Artists painted pirates as men with scars and gold teeth, never as women who commanded storms. The silence was deliberate. Empires needed to protect their narrative of power, and in that narrative, rebellion could only belong to men. It would take hundreds of years before historians reopened the dusty archives and rediscovered the truth. Court transcripts, ship manifests, and letters from sailors revealed what had been buried. That women were present in nearly every major pirate fleet of the Golden Age, from the Caribbean to the South China Sea. They were not myths. They were leaders, warriors, and navigators. Their only crime was daring to live without permission. The cruelty they suffered after capture was not justice. It was revenge. It was the world punishing them for stepping outside the roles assigned to them. The gallows was never just about death. It was about spectacle, a way for the empire to remind its people that control was divine, that rebellion was sin, and that a woman's freedom was the greatest threat of all. But for all its power, the Empire failed to erase their spirit. Because rebellion has a way of surviving, even in whispers, even in legend. In coastal towns across the Atlantic, stories of women pirates became ghost tales told to sailors. The red-haired woman who walked the shore during storms, the captain whose laughter echoed in the waves, the ghost ship crewed entirely by women. The Empire called them superstition. But those stories carried something stronger than fact. They carried defiance. They were the sea's way of saying that freedom cannot be drowned. History remembers the kings who conquered and the admirals who ruled the seas, but it forgets the women who dared to steal the wind itself. The world tried to drown their memory, yet their courage still rises with every tide. They were hunted, silenced, and erased, but not defeated. Because freedom, once tasted, never dies. It lingers like salt in the air, refusing to fade. So tell me, were these women truly criminals, or the first revolutionaries of the sea? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories, the empire buried beneath waves and silence.